Chapter 1. The Catalyst. Part 1. A Dull Life. Anne Beddingfield had always lived a life devoid of excitement. Growing up in the quiet village of Little Hampsley, she had grown accustomed to the monotony that filled each day. Her father, Professor Beddingfield, was a renowned anthropologist, but his genius had always been trapped in the dusty pages of his books, far removed from the world of ordinary men. The only excitement in Anne's life came from reading tattered novels from the village library, dreaming of adventures and love stories that seemed a world away. Her father, a man obsessed with the past, could never understand her longing for something more than the life of a dutiful daughter. He had no time for modern life, only for the ancient and primitive world of man. Anne had often imagined what it would be like to experience something real, to step out of the shadows of academia and into the unknown. She yearned for a life of romance, danger, and discovery, but all she had was an endless cycle of dusting off her father's old manuscripts and assisting him with research. Her life, like her father's, was lived in the past until the day it was abruptly torn apart. Part 2. The Professor's Death. One morning, Anne came downstairs to find her father in an unusually animated state. He was pacing in the small dining room, mumbling excitedly about a recent discovery, a prehistoric skull found at a mine in northern Rhodesia. Anne, still sleepy, listened vaguely as he spoke, only half understanding his fervor. But his passion was contagious, and for a moment, she could almost see herself standing beside him, lost in the excitement of a great find. But that was not to be. Later that afternoon, Professor Beddingfield fell ill, his chest rattling with a violent cough. The doctor was summoned, but by the time he arrived, it was too late. Within 4 days, Anne found herself an orphan. The funeral was simple and quiet, and Anne couldn't help but feel a strange detachment. She had always known that her father had never truly loved her, but the reality of his death left her with a profound sense of emptiness. It was only then that Anne realized something startling: freedom. She was no longer bound by the obligations of a daughter, no longer forced to care for a father who had never understood her. The world, once distant and unreachable, was now open before her. But with that freedom came the crushing weight of reality. She was alone and penniless, and yet, for the first time, Anne felt a flicker of hope. She was free to make her own choices. Chapter 2. A Glimpse into Darkness. Part 1. The Tube Incident. A week after her father's death, Anne ventured into London to seek answers, to discover what lay beyond her small village. She wandered the city streets, feeling a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. It was on that day that she witnessed the strange, almost surreal incident at Hyde Park Corner Tube Station. She had just stepped onto the platform when a man in a brown overcoat caught her attention. He stood at the far end of the platform, staring into the distance with an expression of profound unease. His posture seemed stiff, unnatural, like a man waiting for something or someone. Anne couldn't help but stare. She had seen his type before: an ordinary man, perhaps too ordinary, whose presence screamed of something hidden. She watched as he turned suddenly, his eyes meeting hers for a split second. His face was pale, his features sharp, almost hollow. There was something unnerving about the way he moved too quickly, too anxiously. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, the man stumbled backwards, teetering dangerously near the edge of the platform. Before Anne could react, there was a flash of light, a terrible screeching sound, and the man was gone. A few moments passed before chaos erupted. People ran towards the scene, some calling for help, others standing frozen in shock. Anne stood still, paralyzed by the horror of what had just occurred. The man had fallen onto the tracks, but his death wasn't the only thing that troubled her. The look in his eyes before he fell, the fear, the panic was as if he had been running from something. A doctor arrived moments later, bending over the body with an air of detached professionalism. Anne couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She was too far to see his face clearly. But she noticed something strange. He didn't seem quite right either. His hands were too stiff, his movements too calculated, and then he vanished as quickly as he had appeared. Part 2. The Cryptic Note. Later that evening, as Anne walked home through the misty streets, she couldn't stop thinking about the accident. Something in her gut told her that the man's death wasn't a simple tragedy. It was as though fate had brought her to that very moment, and she couldn't let it go. As she walked past a newsstand, she noticed a small piece of paper caught between the pages of a discarded newspaper. She bent down to pick it up, and as she unfolded it, her heart skipped a beat. The paper contained a few words and a series of numbers, hastily scrawled in pencil. Kilmorden Castle. Her mind raced. Kilmorden Castle. Why did it sound familiar? And the numbers? What did they mean? Without hesitation, Anne tucked the paper into her coat pocket. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming need to follow this thread wherever it led. Something told her that this was the key to the mystery. The next morning, she would begin her search. Chapter 3. The Man in the Brown Suit. Part 1. Following the Trail. The next morning, Anne awoke with a strange sense of purpose. Her life had taken an unexpected turn in the past week, and now, with nothing left to lose, she was determined to uncover the mystery that had begun with a random accident at the tube station. The note in her pocket weighed heavily on her thoughts. The cryptic numbers in the name Kilmorden Castle were not just random gibberish. There was meaning behind them. Something hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. Anne spent the morning in the library, combing through old maps and books, but the name Kilmorden Castle eluded her. She had hoped for a historical reference, perhaps a castle linked to an ancient noble family, but nothing appeared. It was as if the name itself had been erased from history. Frustrated, she set off for the local house agents. She wasn't sure exactly what she was looking for, but she knew that sometimes the most obscure clues could reveal the greatest secrets. At the agency, a young clerk greeted her politely but distractedly. When Anne mentioned Kilmorden Castle, the clerk's demeanor shifted. He paused, as if uncertain about the name. "You mean the mill house?" he asked cautiously. Anne's heart skipped. "Mill house," she repeated. "What's the connection?" "Oh, it's just that, well, you see, it's actually the same place. But no one's wanted it for ages now. Not after the well. You know, the incident." It's been on the market for years. The incident Anne pressed. The murder, the clerk muttered, clearly uncomfortable. The word hit Anne like a slap. The mill house. The woman who had been killed, Mrs. DiCastina, had been found there. It was the same house the man in the brown suit had been connected to. The pieces were falling into place, one after the other. Without another word, Anne took the order to view the property. She needed to see this house for herself. She knew that somehow everything led back to the mill house. Part 2. The house at Marlow. The mill house was an imposing structure set against a backdrop of dense trees and mist. When Anne arrived, she was greeted by Mrs. James, the caretaker, a stout woman with a no-nonsense attitude. She handed Anne the keys with a simple nod, but there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of fear, as if the house itself was haunted. Anne unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was dark, filled with shadows that seemed to swallow the light. The air smelled of dust and neglect, and a sense of abandonment clung to every corner. She ventured through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she explored, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It was a peculiar sensation, as though someone, something, was watching her from just out of sight. The room where the woman had been found was eerily untouched, the faint smell of stale perfume lingering in the air. Anne's gaze swept over the room. She could almost picture the woman standing there, smiling to herself just before the fatal confrontation. Suddenly, something caught her eye, something small and almost insignificant. A faint smear of grease on the wooden floor near the window. It didn't belong there. She crouched down to examine it more closely and discovered the imprint of a boot large and heavy, like a man's. Her heart raced as she connected the dots. The man in the brown suit had been here. He had been in this very room. Anne straightened up, a sense of urgency seizing her. She needed answers. And she was certain now that Kilmorden Castle, or rather, the mill house, held the key to the mystery. Chapter 4. The Tipping Point. Part 1. A Dangerous Discovery. The next few days were a blur of unanswered questions and strange encounters. Anne returned to the house at Marlow, seeking any clue that might explain the connections she had uncovered. But each time, the house seemed to reveal less and less. The more she searched, the more she felt she was being drawn into a web of deception that threatened to engulf her. One evening, as she stood in the hall of the mill house, she heard a faint sound coming from the upper floor. Her heart skipped a beat. Slowly, she ascended the creaky stairs, every step echoing in the stillness. At the top of the staircase, she froze. There, standing at the end of the corridor, was the man in the brown suit. He had been following her. Before she could react, he stepped into a room, disappearing into the darkness. Anne stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Should she follow him? Confront him? The fear she had been suppressing now bubbled to the surface. But curiosity, too, pushed her forward. She didn't know if it was bravery or sheer desperation, but she found herself stepping into the room after him. It was empty, but Anne wasn't alone. From the shadows, a voice spoke, low and menacing. You should stop asking questions. The voice sent a chill down her spine. Slowly, She turned to face the man. He stood there, as calm as ever, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. His eyes glinted with something dark, something that told her she was in far deeper than she had realized. "I know enough to know that you're hiding something," Anne replied, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. The man said nothing. Instead, he took a small step closer. "Leave now, before it's too late." Anne didn't move. "I'm not leaving until I get answers." The man's gaze darkened, and in that moment, Anne knew she had crossed the line. Whatever game was being played, it was no longer just a mystery, it was a fight for survival. Part 2. A Deal with the Devil. Anne's determination only grew stronger after her encounter with the man in the brown suit. The warning had done nothing to deter her. If anything, it confirmed her suspicions there was something sinister at work, and she needed to uncover the truth before it was buried forever. She contacted a man who had been watching her progress from the sidelines, Lord Nasby, the owner of the Daily Budget. He had shown an interest in her findings, and Anne knew that she needed all the help she could get if she were to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy surrounding the mill house and the man in the brown suit. After a tense meeting at Lord Nasby's estate, Anne was given the resources to continue her investigation. But she also realized something else. Lord Nasby wasn't just interested in the mystery. He was interested in using it to his advantage, to further his own agenda. "You've made progress, Miss Beddingfield," Lord Nasby said, his eyes glinting with opportunistic fervor. "But I believe you need a little more guidance." Anne nodded, but her mind raced. She didn't trust him. Not entirely. But she had no choice. She needed access to the resources he controlled. And for now, that meant playing along. The deal had been struck. Anne was now fully committed to the dangerous path ahead, no turning back. As she left Lord Nasby's estate, the weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her shoulders. There was no more room for hesitation. The man in the brown suit was watching her, but she was no longer running from the shadows. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Unexpected Encounter. Part 1. A Step Too Far. Anne couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Even in the bustling streets of London, amid the constant hum of activity, there was always a flicker of movement at the edge of her vision, a face, half seen, disappearing just as quickly as it appeared. The man in the brown suit was always close, always present in the background of her life. Despite her growing unease, Anne refused to back down. The trail had become too clear, and the more she discovered, the more she realized that the man she had encountered at the tube station was just the beginning of something much larger. She had learned from Lord Nasby that the conspiracy surrounding the mill house was far from over. In fact, it was only the tip of the iceberg. Anne knew she couldn't trust anyone completely. Lord Nasby, despite his seemingly helpful demeanor, had motives of his own. But she had no choice if she wanted answers. She would have to continue working with him, at least for now. Her resolve was tested when, one night, as she walked alone through the quieter parts of the city, she stumbled upon the one man who seemed to hold all the answers. It was a chance encounter, one that would change everything. Anne was crossing the street near a dark alley when she saw him. The man in the brown suit, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. His figure was unmistakable, and for a moment, her heart skipped a beat. She froze, staring at him from across the street. He hadn't noticed her yet, but it was only a matter of time. Without thinking, Anne stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. She was determined to confront him, to demand answers. She moved with purpose, her steps growing faster, but as she neared him, a sudden force gripped her chest. She stopped in her tracks. The man had disappeared. Anne stood there, confused and frustrated. She knew she had seen him, but now the alley was empty. No signs of his presence. No footsteps, nothing. Her mind raced. Had it been a trick of the light? Was she losing her grip on reality? A voice broke the silence behind her. Looking for someone, Anne spun around. Standing there was a man she didn't recognize. Tall and imposing, with piercing blue eyes. He was dressed casually, but had an air of authority about him. His gaze was intense, as if he could see straight through her. I thought I saw someone. Anne stammered, trying to mask her unease. The man didn't seem convinced. You've been following someone, haven't you? The man in the brown suit. Anne's heart skipped. How did he know? Before she could respond, the man continued, his voice low and calm. Don't bother denying it. I've been watching you too. You've made quite an impression. Miss Beddingfield. The realization hit Anne like a wave. This man wasn't just some passerby. He was involved in the mystery. But who was he? And why was he following her? I don't know what you mean, Anne said, trying to keep her voice steady. Don't lie. The man interrupted. You're searching for answers, just like the rest of us. The question is, are you ready to hear the truth? Anne felt her pulse quicken. She had no choice but to follow him. She needed answers. And something in her gut told her that this man, whatever his connection to the mystery, was the key. Part 2. The Game of Shadows. The man led Anne down a narrow side street to a small, unmarked door. There was no sign, no indication of what lay behind it, just an old wooden door that seemed out of place amidst the modern buildings surrounding it. He knocked 3 times, a rhythm Anne instantly recognized as purposeful, deliberate. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. Inside, Anne saw several people seated at a large table, papers scattered in front of them, their faces obscured in the shadows. There was an air of quiet authority in the room, and Anne felt an unsettling sense that she had just stepped into something much deeper than she had anticipated. This is where the real work happens, the man said, motioning for Anne to enter. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. There were no windows, only the soft hum of an old lamp in the corner. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she recognized a few familiar faces. Some were strangers, but others, Lord Nasby among them, had been involved in her investigation. It all made sense now. The man in the brown suit wasn't just a man. He was part of a network, a web of individuals who were orchestrating something far more complicated than Anne had ever imagined. Lord Nasby stood up from the table, his expression unreadable. Miss Beddingfield, I see you've made it. Good, we need to talk. And Anne's stomach twisted. She had no idea what she had walked into, but she couldn't back out now. The truth was too close, and she had no intention of backing down. You've been asking the right questions, but you haven't been asking them in the right place. Lord Nasby continued, You see, the man in the brown suit. He's just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and you've just begun to uncover it. Anne felt her heart race. What do you mean? Who are these people? What do you want with me? We don't want anything from you. Miss Beddingfield, Nasby replied, his voice calm, almost too calm. But you've become a part of something far bigger than yourself. The mill house. That's just the beginning. He paused, letting his words sink in. The real question is, are you willing to go further to uncover what lies beneath the surface? Because what you've discovered so far is just a glimpse of the truth, and it's far darker than you could imagine. Anne stood there, her mind spinning. The mystery was no longer just a series of disconnected clues. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, one that she was now deeply entangled in. And whatever truth lay hidden in the shadows, she knew she had to face it. But as she looked around the room, one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The game of shadows had only just begun. Chapter 6. The Tipping Point. Part 1. The Depths of Deception. The room was still, and Anne's mind raced. The words that Lord Nasby had spoken echoed in her ears, and the air around her seemed thick with anticipation. She had walked into a den of secrets, and now she was part of the story, whether she liked it or not. The man in the brown suit, Lord Nasby, and the people seated at the table were all linked in a complex web of intrigue. But Anne had no idea how deep this conspiracy went. Tell me everything, Anne demanded, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. Lord Nasby raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured to one of the figures at the table, a tall man with sharp features and cold eyes. The man stood up, walked over to Anne, and placed a file in front of her. This, he said, contains everything you need to understand the situation. But be warned, once you read it, there's no going back. Anne's fingers trembled as she opened the file, her gaze sweeping over the contents. The first page contained a detailed diagram of a criminal network with names, dates, and connections linking individuals across countries. But what caught her eye was a photograph, faded and grainy, but unmistakable. It was a picture of a man she had seen before, the man in the brown suit. This is where it all begins, Lord Nasby said, his voice laced with authority. That man you've been chasing, the one you saw in the tube, is part of a much larger operation. He's not a mere criminal. He's a cog in a machine that controls everything. Anne's gaze flickered back to the photograph. Who is he? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He's a key player, one of the highest-ranking members of an international organization known only as the Order, Nasby explained. They're the ones behind the murder at the mill house, the one that started all of this. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together. But Anne couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something crucial missing, something more than just a shadowy organization pulling strings from the darkness. Why me? Anne's question cut through the tension in the room. Why have you brought me into this? What do you want from me? Nasby's eyes flickered with something, perhaps amusement, perhaps contempt. What do we want from you? Oh, Miss Beddingfield, You've already proved yourself more capable than most. You've been asking the right questions. And you have the one thing that no one else has access to the people involved. You were at the mill house. You were there when the woman was killed. And now you're tangled up in their game. Anne's mind whirled. Was this all part of their plan? Had she been manipulated from the very start? I don't want to be part of this, Anne said sharply, her resolve hardening. I just want the truth. I want to know who killed that woman and who is behind all of this. Nasby's expression softened slightly. The truth is complicated, Miss Beddingfield, but you'll learn it in time. For now, what's important is that you continue your investigation. You're already in too deep to back out now. Anne looked down at the file, her thoughts swirling. The faces in the photograph were unfamiliar, but the names and dates, those were the threads that tied it all together. The man in the brown suit was just one part of a much bigger conspiracy, one that spanned continents and involved people who were untouchable by the law. But what was the connection to Kilmorden Castle? Was the clue she had found merely a red herring, or was it something far more dangerous? I'll continue, Annie said quietly, making a decision she knew would change her life forever. But I need more information. I need to know who's pulling the strings. Nasby's eyes gleamed, and for the first time, Anne saw a flicker of something akin to respect in his gaze. I knew you'd be useful. Very well. I'll give you what you need. But you must promise me one thing. Whatever happens, you don't stop. Do you understand? Anne hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but there was no turning back now. She nodded. I understand. Part 2. The puzzle unfolds. Over the next few days, Anne was thrust into a world that seemed more like a nightmare than reality. She was given access to the inner workings of Lord Nasby's operation, but she quickly learned that nothing was as it seemed. The more she discovered, the more she realized that she had stumbled into a world of power, corruption, and violence where the rules didn't apply, and the people at the top were untouchable. Nasby's people worked in the shadows, moving between safe houses and hidden locations, tracking every step of the conspiracy. Anne was given the task of gathering information on key members of the organization, focusing on their movements and connections. But every lead she followed seemed to bring her closer to danger. One evening, as she was reviewing the latest intel, Anne received a phone call. It was a voice she hadn't expected to hear. Miss Beddingfield, the voice said, low and urgent. It's time. We need you at Kilmorden Castle. You've come far enough. The words sent a jolt of fear through her. Kilmorden Castle, was it real, or was it just another clue in the twisted game they were playing? I'm coming, Anne replied, her voice steady despite the dread building inside her. It was time to face the truth. She had followed the breadcrumbs, uncovered the lies, and now the final piece of the puzzle was within reach. Chapter 7. Unraveling the Truth. Part 1. The Castle in the Shadows. Kilmorden Castle stood as a towering silhouette against the darkening sky. The air was cold, and the wind howled through the barren landscape. Anne stood at the entrance, her breath fogging in the chill, her heart racing in anticipation. The castle had been abandoned for years, its crumbling walls telling a story of forgotten glory. But to Anne, It was no longer just an old ruin. It was the final destination in a journey that had consumed her. Inside, the castle was even more oppressive. The stone walls seemed to close in on her as she walked through the dimly lit corridors. Her footsteps echoed through the vast emptiness, and each door she passed seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Finally, she reached the central chamber, a large, cavernous room with high ceilings and an air of decay, and standing there, waiting for her, was the man in the brown suit. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost resigned, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of warning and regret. Anne didn't flinch. "I have to know the truth. I can't stop now." The man's eyes narrowed. "The truth. You think you want the truth. But what you don't realize is that the truth is far more dangerous than you could ever imagine." Anne took a step closer. "I've already come this far. I'm not turning back." The man sighed, a flicker of something dark crossing his features. "Very well," he said, his voice low and final. "If you're determined to uncover the truth, then you'll learn what we've all been hiding. But be prepared. Once you know, there's no unknowing." With that, he turned and led her deeper into the castle. Chapter 8, The Trap is Set. Part 1. Into the Heart of Darkness. The deeper Anne ventured into the castle, the darker the air seemed to grow. The stone walls, slick with dampness, towered around her like silent sentinels. The flickering light of her lantern cast long, eerie shadows on the walls, and every creak of the old wood beneath her feet sent a shiver of unease through her spine. She was getting closer. She could feel it. Whatever she had come for, whatever truth she sought, it was within her reach. The man in the brown suit walked ahead, his footsteps sure and steady, as if he had memorized the labyrinthine paths of the castle. He had not spoken since their arrival, and Anne had not pressed him. There were questions, endless questions, swirling in her mind, but she knew that now was not the time. They reached a heavy iron door at the end of a long corridor. The door was ancient, its surface worn smooth by the passage of time. The man in the brown suit paused for a moment before reaching into his coat and producing an old, rusted key. Anne's breath caught. Was this it? The moment she had been waiting for, the final revelation? The door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a dimly lit room filled with rows of bookshelves, each one crammed with old tomes and papers. The air smelled of mildew, ancient paper, and something else, a faint, acrid scent that she couldn't quite place. The man led her inside, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting to find someone waiting for them. "Welcome to the heart of the operation," he said, his voice flat. "This is where it all began." Anne stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. Her eyes scanned the shelves, looking for anything that could explain what was happening, anything that might make sense of the chaos she had stumbled into. Then she saw it. On one of the shelves was an old, dusty ledger. It looked out of place among the other books, its leather cover worn and faded. She reached out and pulled it from the shelf, flipping it open to the first page. The handwriting was scrawled in a hurried, frantic manner. The words jumped out at her. She scanned the pages quickly, her heart beating faster with every line. The ledger detailed a network of individuals, names, dates, and places all connected to an organization known as the Order, a secret society hidden in the shadows, with its tendrils reaching into the highest levels of government, finance, and power. And then, at the back of the ledger, Anne found something that made her blood run cold, a list of names, including her own. Her name had been written in bold, dark ink, as if someone had deliberately marked her. Beside it was a date, January 17th, 1922, the same date that had appeared on the mysterious note she had found weeks ago. Her stomach twisted in horror. She wasn't just a bystander. She was part of this. Somehow, she had been pulled into the web of the Order, a player in a game far bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "Why me?" Anne whispered, the question escaping before she could stop herself. The man in the brown suit turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Because you were always meant to be," he replied. "Your father's work, your involvement in the mill house. It's all been leading up to this." Anne felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "My father. He was never involved in this, was he?" He met her gaze, his eyes cold and distant. "Your father's research was never just about anthropology, Miss Beddingfield. It was always about something much greater. Your father was one of us, though he never fully understood the extent of it. But now, you've inherited his place in the Order. Whether you like it or not, you are part of this world." Anne's mind reeled. The realization was too much to absorb in a single moment. She had spent years living in the shadow of her father's genius, always longing for adventure, for meaning beyond the mundane. But now, she was faced with the horrifying truth that she had been part of a much darker plan all along. Part 2. The Face of Betrayal. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Anne's heart raced. She wasn't alone in the castle. The man in the brown suit stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to the inside of his coat, where he likely carried a weapon. "We have company," he muttered under his breath. Anne's mind was still reeling, but she knew one thing: she had to get out of there. She couldn't trust anyone in this place, not the man in the brown suit, not Lord Nasby, and certainly not the Order. They had been playing her from the start. Without thinking, she dropped the ledger and bolted for the door. She had no idea where she was going, but instinct drove her forward. The castle was massive, its halls winding like a maze, but Anne was determined to find a way out. As she ran down the corridor, she turned a corner and nearly collided with a figure that emerged from the shadows. It was another man, tall and imposing, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip iron tight. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice cold and commanding. Anne struggled, trying to break free, but his grip only tightened. "Let go of me," she shouted, but her voice barely echoed in the vast emptiness of the castle. The man smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "You're not going anywhere, Miss Beddingfield. The game is over." Anne's pulse pounded in her ears. She was trapped, and just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the sound of footsteps approached from behind. She turned to see the man in the brown suit emerging from the shadows. "Let her go," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. The man holding Anne hesitated, his grip faltering slightly. It was enough for Anne to twist free. She sprinted down the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stop now. The castle was closing in on her. Chapter 9. The Final Showdown, Part 1. A Race Against Time. Anne stumbled through the dark corridors, her mind racing. The truth was out. She had been caught in a web of lies and deceit from the very beginning, and now the only thing that mattered was escape. The Order, Lord Nasby, the man in the brown suit, they were all part of the same shadowy organization, and they were closing in on her. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan. All she knew was that she had to get out, away from the people who had been pulling the strings, using her as a pawn in their dangerous game. Her footsteps echoed in the silence of the castle. She could hear the sound of her pursuers growing louder behind her, but then she rounded a corner and saw an old rusted door at the end of a narrow corridor. She raced toward it, her heart hammering in her chest. She yanked the door open, only to find herself facing a dead end, nothing but darkness beyond. Anne froze, panic flooding her chest. She turned around, only to find the man in the brown suit standing at the other end of the corridor. "You've come too far, Miss Beddingfield," he said, his voice cold and final. Anne took a step back, her eyes darting around for an escape. But the walls seemed to close in on her, and she realized, with a cold shiver, that she had nowhere left to run. The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he said. "You've played your part, and now you'll be part of the Order forever." Anne's heart skipped a beat, but then something snapped inside her. She wasn't going down without a fight. "I refuse," she said, her voice steady. "I won't be anyone's pawn." With that, she turned and bolted back down the corridor, racing toward the one place she hadn't explored, the dungeon. It was her last chance. Chapter 9. The Final Showdown, Part 2. The Dungeon of Secrets. Anne's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors. The sound of her pursuers' footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder with every passing second. She had no choice now, no plan other than to run, to get away from the people who had trapped her in this twisted game. The castle had become a maze, each turn more confusing than the last. Anne's mind was clouded with panic, but one thought drove her forward: the dungeon. She had seen the iron-bound door as she passed earlier, hidden at the far end of the hall. It had seemed like the perfect dead end, but now it was her only hope. She reached the door and tried to twist the rusted handle. It gave way with a creak, but it was stuck, clinging tightly to its frame. Desperation flooded through her. Her eyes darted to the shadows behind her, knowing that her pursuers were getting closer. With a burst of strength, she shoved the door hard. It finally budged, creaking open, just wide enough for her to squeeze through. Anne tumbled into the darkness, the cold air rushing over her. She closed the door behind her as quietly as she could, hoping to delay the inevitable chase. The dungeon was as cold as the grave, a dank, oppressive space that reeked of mildew and decay. Her heart pounded as she looked around in the dim light. Stone walls lined the room, each corner filled with shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. Suddenly, Anne heard a faint scraping sound from the far side of the room. She froze. The sound was low, deliberate, like the scratching of a key on stone. And then she saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, barely visible in the dim light. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. His face was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. His eyes glinted with a mixture of recognition and something darker. "You shouldn't have come here, Miss Beddingfield," the man said, his voice low and calm, though there was an unmistakable edge to it. Anne's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to steady her voice. "What do you want from me?" The mouse smiled an eerie, calculated smile. "I'm just another player in the game, just like you. But I've been watching you, Miss Beddingfield, watching your every move. You're more than you seem, aren't you?" Anne's mind raced. The game. What did he mean? She had no time to think, no time to figure out who he was or what he wanted. The only thing she could do now was survive. Suddenly, she realized with a jolt the man was holding something in his hand. A knife. The glint of the blade reflected the little light that flickered in the room, and Anne's blood ran cold. He took a step toward her, and then another. "No one gets away from the order," he said, his voice now tinged with menace. "Not once they've been marked." Marked? The word echoed in Anne's mind as she backed away from him, her chest tightening in fear. She had been marked from the very beginning. She had been part of their plan, whether she had known it or not. But now, it was no longer about uncovering the truth. Now, it was about surviving. With a burst of adrenaline, Anne bolted past him, charging toward the back of the dungeon. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay in that room with the man. She could hear his footsteps behind her, the sound of pursuit, relentless. She spotted an open door at the far side of the dungeon, another way out. Without thinking, she lunged for it, throwing her body against the wooden frame. The door opened with a loud crash, and she stumbled into the cold night air. Anne didn't stop running. She couldn't. The darkness of the castle was behind her, but now the real chase had begun. Part 3. The Escape. The grounds of Kilmorden Castle stretched out before her, vast and unwelcoming. Anne could hear the man's pursuit growing nearer, his footsteps gaining on her with every second. But she wasn't going to give up now, not after everything she had uncovered. She ran, faster than she ever had before, through the thick, overgrown grass toward the edge of the property. The moonlight barely lit her way, but Anne's instincts guided her forward, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of escape. As she neared the edge of the castle grounds, she saw something that gave her a flicker of hope. A vehicle parked at the far side of the road, a car with its headlights dimmed. It was her only chance. Anne pushed herself harder, her breath ragged as she ran for the car. She could hear the man shouting now, the sound of his voice growing fainter as she reached the vehicle. Without stopping to think, she yanked open the door. Throwing herself inside, the engine roared to life. Anne slammed her foot onto the gas pedal and sped off into the night, her heart still racing. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get as far away from the castle as possible. As the car tore down the winding road, Anne glanced into the rearview mirror. The silhouette of Kilmorden Castle loomed in the distance, its shadow stretching out across the land. But the man in the brown suit, the figures she had encountered, were still behind her. The mystery wasn't over. Anne didn't know what awaited her in the future, but she was determined to find out. She had uncovered the truth about the Order, but there was more to the story, more players, more secrets, and she would uncover them all, no matter the cost. Epilogue. A new beginning. Anne's escape from Kilmorden Castle had marked the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. But the world she had stumbled into, the world of the Order and its shadowy conspiracies, had not disappeared with her flight. It had only just begun to unfold. In the weeks that followed, Anne found herself deeper in the heart of a labyrinth that spanned countries, cultures, and histories. She uncovered old alliances, forgotten betrayals, and secrets that even the most powerful people in the world had tried to bury. She had gone from a quiet, unassuming daughter of an eccentric professor to a woman at the center of a global conspiracy. But now, with every answer came more questions. And Anne knew one thing for sure: she would never stop seeking the truth, no matter where it led. The man in the brown suit was only one part of the puzzle, and Anne had no intention of letting the game end until she had uncovered every last secret. After all, the real story was still waiting to be told. And Anne Beddingfield, she was just getting started. Honda, oh, in my bishukon.